The night had teeth, and it sank them into her skin as she stood alone at the edge of a world that was no longer hers. Elise clutched her mother's silver pendant until the edges cut into her palm, as if pain itself might anchor her to something real, something hers. The stone steps beneath her feet were damp with mist, and the silence of the estate pressed down heavier than chains. Somewhere beyond the fog, a wolf howled, a sound both mournful and commanding, and her heart answered with a trembling beat that betrayed the fear she tried to bury. Her father's voice still echoed like a curse. "You'll fetch a good price." He had not looked at her when he said it. He had not dared. The words had come brittle, cracked, wrapped in desperation that spoke of debts too deep, of shame too heavy to confess. And so she had been traded, no longer daughter, no longer free, offered to the Alpha of the Northern Territories, a man known not just for power, but for cruelty, whispered in taverns and kitchens where the fire burned low. Rowan, they called him, the wolf who killed his own father to seize command, the monster who ruled with precision so sharp it cut deeper than any blade. The doors of the mansion groaned open, spilling warmth and the scent of smoke and pine. A woman with silver-streaked hair measured Elise with eyes that knew both pity and contempt. The contract was taken, the exchange sealed, her life signed away for 1 year. A year in service, though both women knew service was only another word for surrender. Elise was led inside, her threadbare coat stripped away, her old life burned in the hearth of a house that devoured identities. Each hallway she crossed seemed to whisper stories of those who had come before, those who had disappeared into silence. But when the Alpha appeared, the air itself changed. Heavy steps, like thunder caged in human form, drew near. "Look at me," he commanded, and though her body resisted, her spirit lifted her gaze inch by inch until her eyes collided with his, and in that moment the world split. He was not beast nor man alone, but something perilously beautiful. Eyes pale as silver fire, face carved by cruelty and loneliness alike. A scar traced his cheek, like a frozen tear that refused to fall. Elise's breath left her as though stolen, and she realized that fear was not the only current stirring within her chest. Rowan circled her, predator and judge, voice low and dangerous. "Your father spoke of your beauty. He forgot to mention your fear." His hand caught her chin, possessive and unyielding, and she whispered with trembling defiance, "I am not afraid." His cold smile curved, cruel and amused. "Your heart betrays you. I can hear it racing like prey." Yet, in the shadow of his power, she sensed something hidden, a loneliness that mirrored her own. That night, the rules of her new existence were carved into her soul. She belonged to him, at least in name, at least in the way the world would see. But deep inside, she whispered to her mother's pendant, "I belong to no one, not yet." The firelight of his chambers revealed contradictions she could not ignore. Where she expected chains, there were books. Where she braced for cruelty, there was quiet restraint. He showed her the stars from his hidden observatory, and in the reflection of his silver eyes, she caught glimpses of a man carrying more burdens than even his reputation confessed. Between danger and mystery, between fear and fascination, Elise stood at the threshold of something vast, something that could destroy her, or heal her in ways she had long forgotten possible. This was only the beginning of her entanglement with the Alpha, the first step into a year that would test not only her strength, but her heart. And if you find yourself drawn to Elise's journey, to the fragile threads of love and defiance woven through the darkness, let your heart linger here with me. A simple gesture, liking, sharing your thoughts in the comments, or subscribing, becomes a way of keeping this story alive, of sending a little healing energy into the night. Because stories like these are not just told, they are shared, breathed into existence by every soul who listens and stays. And so, beneath the howl of wolves and the weight of destiny, Elise followed Rowan deeper into the mansion, deeper into the labyrinth where danger and desire waited hand in hand. The night had only just begun, and already the path ahead promised no return. Yet something inside her whispered that what she was about to discover would not merely be survival, it would be transformation. The mist outside thickened, the fire inside burned brighter, and with every step the bond between captive and Alpha grew tighter, invisible but undeniable, pulling them toward a story neither had chosen. Yet neither could escape. The betrayal of her family was behind her, but the choices of her heart had only just begun. The first true encounter between Elise and Rowan began not with words, but with silence that pressed against her ribs and demanded she notice every detail of the moment. The corridors of the mansion seemed carved from shadow, ancient tapestries catching faint firelight, wolves frozen in eternal hunts, their eyes glimmering in the dim like guardians of secrets. Elise's pulse ran faster with every step, a rhythm Rowan could surely hear, for he moved like a predator who measured the world not by sight but by sound, by breath, by fear trembling in the veins of others. When at last he stopped before her, the air thickened with his presence. He stood taller than any man she had known, his shoulders broad enough to eclipse the light from the torches, his gaze so piercing that she felt seen in a way both terrifying and undeniable. Silver flickered in his irises, an unnatural brightness that spoke of something older than men, something wild and sovereign. His expression bore cruelty, but also a gravity that made cruelty feel less like a choice and more like a law of nature. "You think I am a monster," Rowan said at last, voice low enough that it seemed to reverberate inside her bones. Elise swallowed, her lips dry, her mother's pendant cool against her skin where her hand pressed it tight. She wanted to deny, to defy, to prove she was not prey, but the words tangled in her throat. He moved closer, each step deliberate, each echo on the polished stone a reminder that she could run nowhere. And yet, instead of shrinking, Elise lifted her chin, determined to preserve the last fragment of dignity she possessed. "I think monsters rarely see themselves as such," she whispered, surprising even herself. His lips curved into something that was not quite a smile, not quite a threat. He leaned closer, scent of pine, smoke, and something darker washing over her like a tide that pulled her further in. "And what do you see when you look at me, little dove?" She should have said cruelty. She should have said danger. Yet what her heart felt was loneliness, a solitude so deep it mirrored her own grief after her mother's death. She trembled, not only from fear, but from the strange pull of recognition. He reached out, his fingers brushing her chin again, lifting her face so her eyes could not escape his. The touch seared through her skin, not rough, not gentle, but absolute. A mark of possession she wished to reject, even as warmth spread where his hand lingered. "You belong to me now," he murmured. The words should have been chains, but Elise felt them ignite instead of crush. "Every breath you take is by my permission." Her defiance rose again, soft but steady. "I belong to no one." His eyes flashed, silver catching fire, but beneath the dominance she glimpsed something else, a shadow of respect for her resistance. His laugh, sharp and sudden, startled her. "Perhaps you will be less dull than I expected." He turned, commanding her to follow. Through endless corridors they walked, servants bowing their heads, avoiding her eyes, yet watching in silence, as if cataloguing every shift of her expression. She realized then she was not merely a guest nor a prisoner, she was an object of speculation. Her presence would ripple through the pack, each wolf trying to guess why their alpha had chosen her. When Rowan's private chambers opened before her, she braced for torture, chains, cruelty in physical form. Instead, she found simplicity. A bed vast yet unadorned, shelves lined with books well worn from touch, a hearth blazing steady warmth. Windows taller than men unveiled the forest stretching infinitely, its branches gleaming under the moon. Elise's breath caught. It was not beauty she expected from a man carved from violence. And yet, here it was. "You are surprised," Rowan noted, reading her thoughts as easily as she might read a page. Elise hesitated, then said softly, "I expected less evidence of humanity." For a moment, something flickered across his face, anger or recognition, or perhaps both. "Humanity is a mask," he replied, "but even wolves need their refuge." His tone carried an ache, hidden but not erased, and Elise found herself looking at him not as alpha, not as executioner of her fate, but as a man who had once been a boy, a son, perhaps a lover, perhaps someone who had lost as she had. The meal that followed carried tension as thick as the fire's smoke. He poured wine, deep red like blood, and watched her eat with an intensity that stripped her bare. She tried to focus on the taste of bread and roasted meat, but every glance from him made her throat tighten. Then, casually, he asked, "Your father claims you can sense more than most, that you can see beyond the surface of men." Elise froze. That secret had been hers and her mother's alone. Fury and betrayal swelled in her chest, but she disguised it with composure. "People exaggerate when desperate," she said quietly. Rowan studied her for a long moment, sipping his wine. Desperate enough to trade his daughter? The truth in his words sliced deep, yet Elise straightened her back. "Desperation does not define me," she whispered, voice steady even as her heart thrashed. For the first time, his gaze softened, almost imperceptibly. "Perhaps not." He set his glass aside, the motion precise, controlled, yet carrying the weight of thoughts unspoken. Later, he led her to the hidden observatory. Stars unveiled themselves above a dome of glass, brighter than she had ever seen from her village. She gasped at their brilliance, and Rowan, standing in moonlight, seemed carved from silver himself. His voice, quiet and low, carried warmth beneath its usual steel. "This is my sanctuary. Few are invited." Elise turned to him, the awe of the stars reflected in her eyes. "Why show me?" His gaze pierced hers, steady and searching. "Because I need you to understand. There are places of beauty here, and places of darkness. Which you see depends on your choices." The words wrapped around her like prophecy. For a moment, the cruelty of her captivity receded, and she saw him not as captor, but as man burdened with power, with choices heavy enough to crush anyone. She realized then that her story with Rowan would not be a simple tale of victim and monster. It would be tangled in shadows and light, in healing and in wounds yet to come. When a howl shattered the night from the forest below, Rowan transformed before her eyes, man to beast, beauty to terror. A black wolf of immense size stood beneath the stars, silver eyes blazing, his howl reverberating through the dome and through her chest. Elise trembled, but inside the trembling was something strange. Awe, and the spark of belonging, as if her very soul had recognized him. She stood long after he vanished into the forest, watching the stars blur through tears she did not understand. Fear had not gone, but beside it now bloomed something else, fragile but real. A thread of connection, of possibility, of a bond she could not yet name. And so, when dawn crept across the horizon, Elise understood that her life was no longer only her own. The path had already been altered, and though danger surrounded her like a second skin, something healing stirred within the cracks of her fear. She would not surrender easily. She would not let her spirit wither. For even in the hands of a cruel alpha, she carried the power to transform not only her fate, but his. The day awaited, heavy with new rules and new secrets, but Elise stepped into it with a heart both trembling and alive. The first encounter had left her shaken, but it had also awakened something within her, a force that would carry her toward the trials of counsel, betrayal, and the dangerous intimacy that waited in the next chapter of her journey. Morning arrived, clothed in quiet. A hush so complete, Elise could hear the soft settling of ash in the hearth and the shy scrape of sparrows against the window glass. The room they had given her was beautiful in the way of cages, tall windows that did not open, velvet curtains that swallowed sound, a bed that held her like an embrace and reminded her with every sighing thread that comfort could also be restraint. Firelight combed golden fingers across the floorboards. Everywhere, warmth pressed close, persuading her to forget why she was here. She would not, but she let the warmth touch her face and loosen the chill wound deep in her bones. On a small birchwood table stood a tray, fresh bread cracking at its seams, sweet butter softening at the edges, a bowl of late pears blushing like secrets in morning light, and a pot of tea fragrant with mountain herbs. The note beside it contained 3 words in a hand spare and decisive. Rest, learn, observe. There was no signature. She didn't need one. The letters bore Rowan's discipline, the kind of economy a man develops when every word is a command. She ate slowly, honoring the food the way her mother had taught her, thankful for sweetness, mindful of hunger, letting the ritual steady her thoughts. The pendant at her throat warmed with her skin. "Always remember your worth isn't measured by others," her mother had said, a phrase that had become both prayer and oath. Elise touched the silver and inhaled, sending a little light into the ache that lived behind her ribs. Healing, she had learned, sometimes began as small and steady as breath. A knock. The door eased open without a sound. Vera entered, dressed in ink-dark wool, hair a clean line of silver, kindness and iron braided into one woman. "There are rules," she said without preamble, as if continuing a conversation they had started in sleep. "You may walk the main floors with an escort. The East Garden and the library are permitted. The training yard is not. After dusk, you remain in your quarters unless summoned. Speak with respect. Listen more than you speak." "I can keep to rules," Elise answered, surprised at how steady she sounded. "Keep to them," Vera said, "but do not be eaten by them." A flicker of almost smile. "Clothes have been laid out. I will return in an hour to show you the house." Alone again, Elise opened the wardrobe. Rich wools, gentle silks, the quiet authority of good seams and thoughtful stitches. She chose a gown of night blue that made her skin look warmer and her eyes more honest. When she moved, the fabric moved with her, not as command, but as companion. In the glass, she saw the girl her village had taught her to hide, the length of her neck, the curve of collarbone beneath the silver pendant, the intelligence in her gaze that often cost women so much. She did not look like a sacrifice. She looked like a beginning. Vera returned with a length of ribbon and a soft bristled brush. She arranged Elise's hair as if she were assembling a spell. Patient hands, no wasted motion, no needles where they should not be. "If anyone treats you as less than present," she said, "stand as if you are the center of the room until they remember you are." The ribbon settled like twilight at the nape of Elise's neck. "Come." They folded into the corridors of the house, a geography of old stone and the polished patience of wood. Light fell through high windows in bars like quiet music. Paintings watched with ancestral calm. Here and there, wolf forms appeared not as threat, but as history. A silver pelt draped beside a brazier, a carved figurehead watching over a stairwell, an iron ring shaped like a snarl guarding a door that would not open for her. Elise listened to the house breathe. All living places breathed. Her mother had said that too. When you listen, you learn whether a place will root for you or try to grind you into its soil. In a long gallery where winter light gathered like thought, Vera stopped before a worn relief carved into a pillar, wolf and woman encircled, neither above the other, the loop unbroken. "Remember this pattern," she said, and nothing more. Elise traced the loop with her eyes until something inside her answered like a far bell. The library rose around them like a forest, where the trees had grown into shelves and the leaves learned to speak. Ladders glided on brass rails. Books wore their years openly, spines scuffed by hands hungry for what words could hold. Warmth in her chest spread like lamplight. "You may use this room," Vera said. "Do not take the upper balcony without permission. If you need a title, ask me. If you cry, do it here. Books swallow tears and trade them for wisdom." "I won't cry," Elise said, but her throat had already tightened for reasons that had nothing to do with sadness and everything to do with finding, unexpectedly, a room that felt like sanctuary. "Thank you." A figure stirred in the far corner. He stepped into view with the quiet alertness of a man accustomed to being needed. Russet hair cropped close, amber eyes steady, shoulders like a door you could brace a house against. "Nathaniel," Vera said by way of introduction, "our beta. He signs the sunrise and the night listens." It was said as if a proverb. Nathaniel's gaze slid to Elise's pendant, then to her face. "So the human is real," he said, not unkindly, not kindly either, careful, like a hunter testing ice before stepping out. "I thought Rowan's new rumor might be a test." "Everything is a test," Vera replied, "and sometimes a door." She moved on. Nathaniel did not block Elise's path. He did not bow either. He stood to the side, respectful as a question mark. As Elise passed, he said low enough for only her to hear, "There are lines in this house. If you do not see them, ask where they run." "Thank you," she said, and meant it. He nodded once, the brick of his mouth softening. The tour continued. Beyond the library, an inner court. Beyond the court, the winter garden, glass-framed, warm with hidden pipes, fragrant with rosemary, bay, and the shy sweetness of violets that bloom for their own joy. The path twined among low box hedges, trimmed with soldierly patience. Water ticked from a lion's mouth into a shallow basin where black pebbles gleamed like seeds. Elise exhaled and felt her breath return to her in a way it hadn't since the carriage stopped at the mansion gates. "Come here daily," Vera said. "It keeps the edges from growing teeth." Elise dipped her fingers into the water, cold, then softly numbing, then clear. Her mother had taught her a simple blessing for places that might hold her, an exchange of quiet promise. "I will respect you," it said. "Respect me back." When she looked up, Vera's assessing gaze had softened. "Good," the older woman said. "You were loved by someone who taught you how to stay alive." They crossed toward another wing. The hum changed, a current moving under the floor, the muffled thud of bodies, the hiss of breath through teeth, the occasional bright ring of metal striking metal. The training yard. Through an arch, Elise saw it, a long rectangle open to weather, the stone warmed by braziers spaced like sentries. Men and women moved across it in measured patterns, barefoot, sometimes bare-armed, sometimes half-shifted, strength swinging in arcs that cut the cold to ribbons. She registered grace before she admitted danger. She could not look away. "Not for you," Vera said, voice calm but absolute. "I understand." And she did. Yet she also understood that understanding did not stop wanting. Watching the fighters, Elise realized that bodies could become language, and she had spent years speaking softly to avoid being misunderstood. Perhaps that had been necessary then. Perhaps it would not always be. They returned by a quieter route, down a corridor with windows of wavy glass that made the outside world ripple like a lake remembering summer. A portrait caught Elise as she passed it. 2 figures, side by side. The woman's hair raven dark, her posture unyielding but kind, eyes like a storm held steady in a cup. The man beside her wore a crown of scar more than gold. He looked like Rowan, only less contained, as if ruthlessness had been first nature, not learned armor. "His parents," Elise said without thinking. Vera inclined her head. "His mother built the library. His father built the walls." "And Rowan?" Elise asked softly. "Rowan keeps the roof from falling in." Vera's mouth pressed into a line that meant no more would be said. Back in her chamber, Elise found a second note in the same spare hand. "Supper at dusk. Come as you are. No command to be beautiful, no inventory of expectations. As you are. She was not foolish enough to take comfort where none was meant, but the words landed gentle. She set the note beneath a glass paperweight that held a sprig of dried heather, and the small act, placing command beneath a flower, made her smile. Time carried her through afternoon like a barge along a steady river. She read in the library, letting her fingers travel spines as if they were old friends she had somehow forgotten. She chose a thin volume of poems written by a woman who had spent a winter in the mountains and learned the names of 30 kinds of snow. The reading loosened a knot that fear had tied behind her heart. She wrote her mother's phrases in the margins where the poet had left white space, and it felt like stitching new cloth with old thread. Different, but honest. When she tired of words, Elise returned to the winter garden. She took off her slippers and stood on the warm stones to feel the day with her whole body. She breathed with the vines. She whispered thank you to everything that had remembered to grow. Those minutes were medicine, quiet, practical, deep. Dusk folded the corners of the house. Candles woke. Somewhere, a bell answered the first star. Vera came for her, and they walked a path Elise was certain she would be able to follow, even with her eyes closed. West Hall, 2 turns left, a short stair, the door with the iron ring shaped like a snarl softened by age. The private dining room held a fire built for thought rather than display. A small table. 2 places. Rowan stood at the hearth. Tonight, his severity had been pared down to essentials. Black shirt with sleeves rolled, throat unbuttoned, as if he had remembered breathing was useful. For a heartbeat, Elise saw not the alpha, but the man who climbed stairs to look at stars and kept his books in careful order so the world would make sense somewhere, if not everywhere. He looked at her as if he were bracing without wishing to be seen bracing. "You found the garden," he said. "It found me," she replied, before restraint could make her voice polite. He noted the answer, and something decided in him to let it stand. They ate. The food was not extravagant. Venison with juniper and wine. Barley studded with tiny pearls of onion. A salad of bitter leaves that woke the mouth and reminded the body it was alive for reasons besides endurance. When silence fell, it did not thud. It rested. "Vera showed you the house," Rowan said at length. "She did. She also gave me advice. I imagine it was practical and sharp." "It was." He considered her across the candle's small, fluent flame. "You will have freedoms others brought here did not. Use them with care. You will have eyes on you, wolves, humans, loyalties made by history and blood. You will hear things, see things. There will be rooms where everyone speaks truth and means it, and rooms where truth arrives in pieces and pretends to be whole." He lifted his glass, then set it back without drinking. "If you are uncertain—" "I will ask," she said, surprising them both with the certainty in it. "I am not here to be ornamental." Something like relief crossed his face quickly, then vanished into composure. "No," he said, softer than command. "No, you are not." He did not reach for her hand. He did not touch the air around her like a net. But Elise felt the shape of what might be built. Patience as scaffold, courage for nails, a roof strong enough to bear weather. It would not keep out every storm, but perhaps it would keep them from drowning inside the house. After supper, Rowan took her to the threshold of the training yard and stood with her just beyond its boundary. Braziers licked calm flame up into winter night. Wolves moved like tide and clockwork, their discipline a kind of music. "This is where edges are polished," he said. "Wolves can be sharpened too fine, then they shatter. I prefer balance. Bluntness learns humility. Precision learns mercy." "Do you expect mercy from your enemies?" Elise asked, not for challenge, but for map-making. "I expect truth from the sky and hunger from the dark," he said. "Mercy I ask of myself, when I can." She believed him more than she wanted to. That frightened her, but fear had learned lately to carry a companion, discernment. It leaned in with her, listening for the grain of him. He walked her back to the corridor that would deliver her to her room. Servants crossed their path like careful fish changing depths. From somewhere unseen came the thin, bright sound of children laughing, high, ordinary, threaded with safety. It startled Elise that laughter lived here at all, then soothed her more than she could say. At her door they paused. The hallway smelled of pine resin and wool warmed by human nearness. "Tomorrow," Rowan said, "you will sit in council. If you stand by the window, no one will see you and you will hear less. Sit near the red tapestry and you will catch every word. If anyone addresses you, look at me, and I will answer or nod for you to speak. There is a pattern to power. I will not let it cut you by accident." She tasted the word tomorrow as if it were a fruit she hadn't tried. "You said I was to rest." "You have," he said. "Now you will learn." He left her then, not with a command, but with a small inclination of his head that conceded he had learned something too. The door closed. The quiet resumed its work. Elise banked the fire, undressed, and slipped beneath the linen that had been warmed with bricks a servant had tucked and whisked away like domestic magic. She watched shadows gather into a temporary country and felt her body register the geography of this bed. She had slept on straw. She had slept on floors. She had slept in a carriage that rattled her bones into a prayer made of ache. This softness should have made her weep. It did not. It made her brave. It reminded her there were gentlenesses the world could still afford, and she would not refuse them when they were honest. Sleep took her, the way rivers take fallen leaves, first slow, then sure. She dreamed of a garden where winter did not win, of a wolf circled by a woman in silver thread, of a room of books so patient they could mend the fine cracks in a heart. She woke before dawn to quiet as complete as snow, the kind of quiet that invites decision. On the table, a third note waited. No seal, no flourish. Wear the burgundy. Sit by the red tapestry. Tea at 9. Council at 10. Underneath, smaller. You are not here to be eaten. The laugh broke from her like a hiccup, bright as a bell. She pressed the paper flat with her palm, grateful for its firmness. She rose. She washed. She dressed in the burgundy whose weight felt like a friend who could lift heavy things with her. When the knock came, it wasn't Vera. It was the young woman who had combed Elise's hair that first evening, Maya, with a basket on her hip and warmth in her eyes, and behind her, Lena, carrying a sliver of nervous light like a candle. "We'll see to the last details," Maya said, voice brisk as soft rain. Together they made quick, gentle work, fastening the simple gold hook at Elise's throat, setting her hair into a shape that would not unravel if the day grew rough, smoothing the fabric so the dress told the right story, present, unafraid. They did not fuss. They did not comment. They moved like kin who had remembered how to be kind. When Elise met her own eyes in the glass, she didn't see a girl traded for debt. She saw a woman who had stepped into a house that wanted to turn her into a rumor and decided to become a fact. She slid the pendant chain between burgundy and skin until the silver rested where her heart wrote its instructions. The weight steadied her. The metal had warmed. It felt like a promise answering a promise. Vera arrived with the tea at 9 precisely, as promised, and they stood together a moment by the window, watching the light climb the frost on the outer panes. "Today will be a rope," Vera said. "Hold with your hands and your teeth. And if the rope burns, remember water first, then salve." "What is the water?" Elise asked. "Breath," Vera said. "And remembering you cannot be made into less without your consent." Elise nodded, letting the words sink until they became part of her. She drank the tea and let the steam kiss her face like blessing. When the cup was empty, she set it down cleanly and looked at Vera. "I'm ready." They walked. The corridors had changed color with the hour. Everything wore a slight edge, as if the house itself understood the difference between mourning and a mourning that mattered. At the threshold of the council chamber, Vera's hand touched Elise's forearm, brief, grounding, a line of human contact drawn like chalk across a battlefield. Then she withdrew to her post at the wall, where servants see everything and are seen by no one. Elise stepped into the room that would try to measure her and found the red tapestry easily, its threads deep as wine, its woven scene a story of wolves and moon and harvest she would decipher later. She took her seat as if she had every right to it, because she did. Power gathered, layered, settled. Rowan entering last, the room rising like a tide to meet him. When his gaze found her, the air inside her lungs remembered how to behave. She felt it then, the shimmer at the edge of her awareness that had always been with her like a ghost child, quiet until needed. The room's emotions rose toward her, textures of heat and grain and weather. She did not drown. She did not refuse them. She let them come like rain to a field that had been waiting all summer for the one good storm. Her task was simple: receive, organize, name. She could do this. She had done harder things with less sleep and no food. Rowan began to speak, and the council answered, and somewhere between his first word and the third report, Elise felt the first false note vibrate through the thread that connected everyone's bodies to their mouths. It was small, it was precise. It came from a man whose beard had been trimmed to perfection and whose voice had learned to carry authority without earning it today. She did not look at him directly. She drew his shape in her mind instead. A careful man, sleek where others were raw, too smooth for winter. She did not yet know his name. But she knew the taste of pretense when it tried to pass itself off as bread. She placed her hands in her lap, let her spine lengthen like a prayer pole, and lowered her breathing into the safe, dark root of the body. So warmth gathered beneath her sternum and blossomed without haste, kindness for herself first, and then for the room. Healing, slow and competent, the kind that does not announce itself, the kind that changes outcomes. The golden cage had not broken open. but light had learned its bars, and light knew where to press. The chamber was built to make men speak carefully. Stone walls held their own counsel. Torches licked low, as if hoarding breath for revelations. Elise sat beside the red tapestry as instructed, the burgundy of her dress a quiet echo of its woven moon and wolves. Around her, chairs scraped, boots settled, rings tapped once and then stilled. When Rowan entered, the air gathered itself. When he took his seat, it exhaled. Reports began. A cadence of territories, weather, supply, quarrels smoothed or sharpened. Elise let the sound pass through the net of her attention until feeling separated from fact, like ore from rock. Curiosity here, pride there, fatigue braided with duty. Most of it was honest, if rough. Wolves wore their intentions the way they wore their scars, visible, unapologetic. But from the third voice on the left, smooth baritone, beard trimmed to an argument with winter, she tasted something coated. The words were appropriate. The emotion beneath them was not. A manufactured grief that didn't bruise the throat. A careful fear that failed to sweat. She did not look directly. She labeled quietly, polished man, salt and pepper, call him the careful one. He spoke of patrols as if arranging chess, not guarding graves. When Rowan mentioned the dead sentries, 3 in 1 month, throats torn, bodies arranged to be found, the room rippled with anguish that smelled of iron and cold. The careful one's grief arrived late, like a man who counts before he cries. Elise rested her hands against her skirts, feeling how the fabric steadied the tremor beneath her skin. She breathed the way Vera had taught her, water first. Her mother's pendant warmed at her sternum, a small moon reminding her body to orbit calm. She did not push. She received, arranged, named. When the careful one answered a question about the southern border, "Quiet," he said, "secure." A thread of satisfaction flicked through his field, too quick for eyes, but not for her. Satisfied about quiet means either he loves the lie or he loves the plan. She let the thought settle without sharp edges. Rowan's gaze brushed her only once. A silver glance, swift as a blade discovering its reflection. He saw nothing in her face except attention, which was what she meant him to see. Yet she felt something in him lean, not his body, but the part that listened with the soles of his feet, the part that had learned to read storms from the quiet before rain. When the council adjourned, the room emptied along practiced currents. Nathaniel, he of the steady mouth and amber eyes, lingered near the door like a question that was polite enough to wait. Rowan dismissed the last of the captains and turned to Elise without flourish. "Walk," he said, a word as simple as a path that had already been cleared. They took the corridor that held winter light like a promise. Their steps echoed in companionable measure. "You heard something," Rowan said at last. Not an accusation, a man laying a piece on a board because it belonged there. "I felt something," Elise answered. "From the third voice on your left, the careful one with the perfect beard. His grief is learned, his fear is timed. When the southern border is mentioned, satisfaction moves through him like a tide. The word quiet tasted of metal." "Vincent," Rowan said. He did not spit the name. He placed it. "My father's advisor. My problem to inherit." He stopped beside a window. The glass wavered the forest into watercolor. You are certain? I am careful, Elise said, the gentlest refusal he would get. Certainty is a mask I don't wear unless it fits. He is wrong-shaped for truth. That I can say. Rowan considered her for the span of 2 breaths. You knew where to sit, he said. You knew how to listen. Your father told me stories. I did not believe all of them. You believed enough to buy a year, Elise said, and the word was not meant to wound, but to anchor the conversation in the place where honesty grew best. The middle. Something like rue turned the corner of his mouth. I believed enough to gamble. I do not gamble with dice. You gamble with people, she said softly. I gamble with wolves, he corrected, softer still. And once with a father. He looked at her then fully, the silver of his gaze stripped of spectacle, only a man's resolve left standing. 3 are dead. Whoever helps the South wants me busy doubting my own. I will not oblige him. I want clean proof. You won't get that from me, Elise said, and watched respect flicker rather than offense. I give you weather, not iron, but weather can tell you where to dig. And you would point me toward Vincent. I would point you toward his pulse when he lies, she said. And the pattern of people who speak just after he does. They adjust themselves to his weather. One woman, copper hair, the one who pressed her lips when I entered. She does not know everything, but she knows he keeps a separate fire. Lydia, Rowan said. The names fell like stones mapping a river. They walked again. Elise felt the ache of the dead along the skirting boards. Some buildings remember. At the turn toward the private stair, Rowan paused. Vera told you what you are? She told me there's a word, Elise said. She let me find its door myself. He watched her a long moment. Say it, he said, as if asking her to place a key into the lock of her own choosing. Venetrix, Elise said. The syllables shivered through the air and settled on her tongue like a taste she had always known but never named. A bridge. His jaw unclenched a fraction. A truth reader. A heat sifter. In our oldest stories, the Alpha and the Venetrix stood together, or both fell. The job is not ornament. It is hunger and responsibility and sleep that doesn't come when it should. I have known both, she said, and I am not ornamental. No, he said again, and the word this time was warmer. Tonight. He cut the sentence, glanced toward a narrow window where twilight varnished the branches in iron. Tonight is the equinox celebration. We run because we remember what we are when our hands are paws and our laws are older than speech. You will attend as my guest. Everyone will be there. Vincent thrives in crowds. He will taste the air for weakness. And if I am seen beside you? Elise asked. She tried to keep it clinical. The question sounded like a violin anyway. He will mistake you for decoration, Rowan said, the ghost of a smile sharpening. I would like him to make that mistake. He had moved without moving. His presence was suddenly close. You will stand where the light can find your face. When he looks at you, listen to what his body mutters. And if the mutter becomes a threat... He didn't finish. He did not need to. She felt the protective radius around him contract, a circle drawn tighter. Do you always hunt with bait? She asked, and only after the words left did she taste their salt. He didn't flinch. Only when I trust the bait to bite back. The smallest tilt of his head, an apology without shame. You may refuse. Elise looked at his hands, not a king's hands, a builder's, a fighter's, a man who had held cold and heat until they became lessons. She thought of the 3 dead. She thought of the girl she had been, who had saved a village by naming a flood in time for sandbags and prayer. She thought of her mother. "We are only helpless until we remember the word that is ours." She lifted her chin. "I don't refuse work that keeps people alive." He absorbed it as a vow and did not thank her. Instead, he offered what words like hers deserved: respect shaped into logistics. "Vera will dress you for wolves with opinions. Maya will place you where you can feel the room without it feeling you too much. I will introduce you as a perspective, not a role." "A name would be useful," Elise said, "for the careful one." "Vincent Hale," Rowan said. "He smiles when other men would nod. Then I will listen when he smiles." They parted with the ease of 2 people who understood that intimacy, to endure, must leave certain doors unforced. Back in her room, the light had turned amber. Maya and Lena arrived with calm hands and a basket that smelled faintly of lavender and starch. The gown they chose was midnight, silver embroidery at the hem, like moonlight breathing along water. They wove her hair with small white flowers, and Elise, who had never been crowned in anything but debt, allowed herself the luxury of feeling adorned not for display, but for clear intention. Healing did not always mean rest. Sometimes it meant being seen correctly. Vera checked the fall of the fabric, the balance of line and body. "You will be looked at," she said without malice. "Let their looking do nothing to your spine." She adjusted the chain so the pendant lay where Rowan's eyes would find it if he needed steadiness during the night. "You think he will," Elise said. "I think he already does," Vera replied, and then mercy changed the subject. 2 rules for celebration. Do not stand between a wolf and an open door. Do not drink what you have not watched being poured. Elise smiled. "And a 3rd? If you are afraid, find a child. They remind the body how to breathe." Vera's mouth gentled. "Or find me." The great hall had remade itself while she dressed. Candles turned the stone into a warm throat. Garlands of late oak and silver grass stitched the rafters to the season. Wolves moved in half-shadow, some with eyes warmed to gold, some with canines that caught light when laughter opened their mouths too wide. Music gathered near the far end, drums like heartbeats taught to dance, a stringed instrument weeping beautifully for its joy. Rowan met her at the entrance, ceremonial black edged with symbols that looked like old moonlight. The sight of him, severe softened by intention, sent something quiet through her body, like a hand smoothing a wrinkled sheet. His gaze traced her face, paused at the pendant, returned to her eyes. "Perfect," he said. "Not about beauty, about readiness." They entered together, and the hall tilted, all eyes a tide. He placed his hand at the small of her back, not possession, but lighthouse. Names fell from him with economy. Captains, elders, the woman with copper hair whose mouth made a narrow door for her words. Lydia bowed her head just enough and met Elise's gaze just enough less. Vincent approached at last, as if evening had been designed to lead to this moment. Up close, his carefulness became its own uniform. His smile was warm in temperature and cold in intention. "Alpha," Vincent said, "a luminous night." He turned to Elise as if receiving a gift he meant to appraise. And this must be the perspective. The word landed like a glove laid over a blade. "Miss Elise," Rowan said, choosing her name like a shield he wanted the room to memorize. "She listens for patterns we have forgotten how to hear." Vincent's smile deepened. Elise felt the little click of satisfaction in him again, like a trap resetting. "We are grateful for fresh ears in old halls." "Gratitude," Elise said, letting her voice carry a breeze across the surface of the words, "is easier to express than to practice." She watched his eyes for the flinch. It was small, but present. Behind it, the clutter of a mind busy hiding tools it had left out. Music rose. The circle for the equinox hunt rite formed. Backs straightened, heads tilted to catch the drum's instruction. Rowan leaned toward her, a murmur at the edge of her ear. He brought a message tonight. Not from the south, from himself. Watch his hands. She watched. Vincent's right thumb rubbed the edge of his forefinger. A counting habit. Anticipation. Not of dance, of delivery. The disturbance came like a script learned by someone who thinks themselves playwright. Two wolves dragged a third toward the dais, young, blood striking his shirt in bad geometry. Nathaniel presented a sealed letter stamped with a sigil. Elise did not know, but Vincent did. His breath lifted, not with fear, with arrival. The hall hushed to a listening so complete, even the candles seemed to shorten their flames. Rowan broke the seal. The words, read aloud by Nathaniel, were shaped to fracture a room. "A traitor among you. Blood already spilled. Surrender or be hollowed by suspicion." The idea was to scatter, the effect for a heartbeat achieved. Murmurs moved. Wolves do not like invisible enemies. Elise did not look at Vincent. She looked at the messenger boy, whose gaze skittered like a hare. When Rowan's growl made the glass tremble, she stepped forward the length of a breath and said quietly, exactly where she knew his ear would find her, "Speak first, decide second." He obeyed the counsel as if he had heard it for years. "Who gave you this?" he asked the boy. Silence. Then the fastest glance. Messenger to Vincent. Messenger away. That was all it took for a man like Rowan. He crossed the distance like nightfall, pinned Vincent to the stone with one forearm and the weight of the room's attention. The careful one smiled even then, a last attempt to make the world a slip. "Your father would not," Vincent began, and Rowan's face did not change, but something in him closed a door that had been standing open to winter for too long. "We are not discussing my father," Rowan said. "We are discussing your dead." He loosened his arm enough for words to pass. Vincent chose the wrong ones. Purity, old law, the fantasy of a better past. The room, alive with grief and its own long-suffering memory, judged him. The woman with copper hair found the truth trailing her ankles and stumbled over it. She had known enough to be stained by silence. The circle completed itself. Wolves do not always need speeches to understand pack law. Rowan's sentence was older than the stones: run and be hunted. Mercy belongs to the runner. Justice belongs to the ground. Elise did not cheer it, did not flinch from it. She stood under the weight of consequence and let it lay cleanly. Vincent was led away, and the hall's heat changed temperature, grief cooling into resolve. Around her, bodies prepared to be wolves. Rowan returned to her no longer ceremonial, no longer careful. just a man with blood on his cuffs and a look in his eyes that belonged to someone who had chosen burden over and over until it grew the shape of his shoulders. "You should not come to the forest," he said, "not command, care." "I will stay," she said. "Rooms also need witnesses." The hunt left like weather. The old women and the very young, the human servants and the lanterns remained. Vera stood with Elise by the window, where moonlight battered softly at the glass. "He listens to you," Vera said. "Some men in power mistake listening for loss. He does not." "He can afford it," Elise said. "No," Vera corrected gently. "He cannot." That is why it matters. They watched shadows moving between trees, flickers of speed, the silver of eyes when heads turned. "You did well," Vera added, as if commenting on the fire's draught. "You kept your shape." When Rowan returned, breath visible in the cold that followed him in, he did not announce outcome. It was written on him. There was blood. There was also something like relief, smashed thin and spread across his features to cool. Elise stepped toward him. Her body did it before her mind asked permission. "It is done," he said. "I am sorry for what was required," she answered, and it placed balm where apologies often place salt. They walked to the small courtyard that held the lion's mouth and the black pebbles. The moon stood above them like a patient witness. "You saved ours," Rowan said. "Perhaps lives. Weather is not iron, but it tells a man which way not to drown. Thank you would be small." "Small things keep people alive," Elise said. "Hot tea." A hand steadying a step. A word at the right time. He studied her for a count of 10. "1 year," he said, voice not ceremonial now, but private. "Not as a price, as a practice. Stand with me. Speak when I would rather not hear. Teach me what you know of storms. I will keep your family safe, and give you what history of yours I can find. At the end, you choose." The offer landed in her chest like a key and like a bird. "Choice," she said, tasting it. "That is what makes bridges, not prisons." "Then let us build," he said. Elise looked at the water, at the pebbles. She placed 2 fingertips into the basin, lifted them wet, and drew a thin line across her wrist where her pulse ran. An old sign her mother had taught her. "Here is my life, and I keep it." "Yes," she said. "For a year, yes." Rowan's exhale was quiet enough to be a secret. He did not touch her. He did not need to. Somewhere in the garden, a violet risked another bloom. Somewhere in the house, a child laughed, and the sound found her like medicine. The candles in the hall guttered one by one, leaving only those that knew how to last. The night let go of its teeth a little. The road ahead lengthened and steadied under their feet. Morning would bring questions and patrols and the slow work of mending trust. It would also bring a room with a red tapestry, a map of names, the warmth of tea, and the knowledge that each of them had placed one true stone into a bridge that meant to hold. And just beyond morning waited the celebration's quieter aftermath, the murmurs, the eyes, the first rumor that would test the new shape of their alliance, the step that would carry Elise farther into the circle where danger and tenderness kept watch on each other like old companions. The morning after the hunt broke across the sky in pale strokes of lavender and smoke. Elise woke not to silence, but to the quiet hum of a house rearranging itself after violence. Servants moved with the hush of water over stone, carrying trays, sweeping ash, folding blood-stained cloths into bundles that would vanish before daylight could accuse them. The mansion had teeth, but it also had rituals for dulling them. Elise lay still for a moment, her mother's pendant warm against her skin, letting her breath come slow, reminding herself she was alive, that she had not been swallowed by the night's savagery. Healing often began like that, by naming survival as the first grace of the day. She rose and dressed in the burgundy gown Rowan had chosen the night before, though now its folds carried the memory of a hall heavy with judgment. When she stepped to the window, the garden below glistened with dew, the violets in bloom as though the earth insisted on gentleness despite what men and wolves chose to do. She let the sight steady her, the fragile petals whispering resilience into her veins. Vera entered without ceremony, carrying tea fragrant with honey and herbs. She placed the cup in Elise's hand and said, "The Alpha asks for you." Her tone was even, but her eyes lingered, measuring whether Elise's shoulders bent or held. Elise lifted her chin. "Tell him I will come." The council chamber had been stripped of last night's fury, its long table restored to order. Rowan stood near the hearth, not armoured in ceremony now, but clothed in simple black, his hair damp from water, his scar catching firelight in a way that looked less like cruelty and more like history. He turned as she entered, and though his posture was straight as ever, something softer passed through his eyes when they met hers. "You stayed," he said, voice low. "I could not turn away from what I helped uncover," Elise replied. His gaze held hers, steady and searching. "Many would have." "Many have." "I am not many," she whispered, and his breath caught as though the words reached a part of him unguarded. They spoke then of Vincent, the traitor whose death had been written by pack law. Rowan asked what Elise had felt, what small fractures her intuition had caught. She answered carefully, weaving her honesty with restraint, never pretending certainty where there was only weather. He listened with a stillness that made her pulse race more than anger ever could. At last he said, "For years I have ruled with fear, believing it the only iron strong enough to keep wolves from tearing each other apart. But last night you showed me another way. Truth, even when whispered, can cut deeper than fear." His hand brushed the edge of the table, a restless gesture that betrayed his tension. "You have become necessary." Elise's heart stilled at the word necessary. Not just useful, not decoration, a place in the architecture of his rule. She felt the weight of it, both crown and chain. "Necessary is a dangerous thing to be," she said softly. "And yet," Rowan answered, stepping closer, "it is what you are." His presence filled the space between them, not crushing but undeniable. He did not touch her, yet she felt the heat of him as if the air itself leaned nearer. Later, when the council gathered again, Rowan introduced her not as prisoner nor as payment, but as advisor. The title spread through the room like a stone dropped into water, rippling, stirring suspicion, respect, envy. Elise stood beneath their eyes with her back straight, her pendant shining against her throat, and thought of her mother's words. "Your worth is not measured by others." For the first time since her father's betrayal, she believed it might be true. Through the hours of debate about borders, allies, provisions, Elise listened. She spoke little, but when she did, her words shifted the air. She named fear when it hid behind bravado. She uncovered grief when it was disguised as anger, and though the wolves bristled, they also listened. Rowan's gaze followed her often, not to correct, but to anchor, as if he drew steadiness from her presence. When the meeting ended, Nathaniel approached, his amber eyes thoughtful. "He trusts you," the beta said. "That is rare. Guard it well." Elise nodded, though she heard in his tone both warning and reluctant respect. That night, Rowan came to her chamber, not with command, but with question. "Walk with me," he said. Together they moved through the winter garden, the air sharp with rosemary and pine. He stopped by the lion's fountain, where water glimmered silver beneath the moon. "I made you a bargain," Rowan said. "1 year, then choice. But know this, I would not hold you by debt, Elise, only by your will." Her breath trembled in the cold. "And if my will leads me away?" "Then I let you go," he said, though the tightness of his jaw confessed the cost. His eyes, silver in the moonlight, softened when they met hers. "But I would hope you stay, not as servant, not even as adviser, but as equal." The words fell between them like seeds, quiet and heavy with promise. Elise felt warmth swell through her chest, a healing that reached even the hollow her father's betrayal had carved. For the first time since her arrival, she did not feel traded. She felt chosen. The garden held its breath as she whispered, "We will see what a year makes of us." Rowan inclined his head, acceptance in the gesture, but his eyes glimmered with something more, something that looked like longing wrapped in restraint. He did not touch her, yet she felt the nearness of touch like a vow deferred. When she returned to her chamber, Elise knew the path ahead would not be simple. She was tangled now in politics, in the fragile trust of wolves, in the gravity of an alpha who carried both cruelty and loneliness in equal measure. But she was also tangled in something else, something that felt like destiny braided with choice. She touched her pendant before sleep, whispering thanks to her mother, to the stars, to the healing that had begun in places she had thought broken beyond repair. And as she drifted into dreams, she felt not prisoner nor pawn, but a woman standing at the threshold of her own story, ready to step further. Morning would bring new trials, secrets yet hidden, bonds yet tested. But Elise's heart, though trembling, was awake, and it carried the strength to face what came next. The council's verdict lingered in the walls long after the room had emptied, as though stone itself remembered the weight of judgment. Elise moved through the corridors with measured steps, her mind tracing the threads of what had been said and what had been hidden. She could still feel the pulse of Vincent's deceit, the sharp echo of Lydia's silence, the hum of Rowan's restraint held like a blade kept in its sheath. But beyond politics and betrayals, something quieter pressed into her chest. The realization that her voice had shifted the current of the pack. She was no longer the stranger bartered away by her family. She was becoming someone who belonged, not by blood, but by the truth she carried. The next morning, Vera came to her chambers with a bundle of garments. "The Alpha requests your presence in the outer hall," she said. Her tone clipped, but her eyes softened by something like pride. "Wear this." Within the folds lay a gown of twilight grey, stitched with threads of silver that caught the light like starlight woven into cloth. Elise let the fabric brush against her skin, its coolness steadying her, as if reminding her she was stepping into something larger than herself. When she entered the hall, Rowan stood waiting by the long windows, his silhouette carved against a sky bruised with early clouds. He did not turn immediately. He seemed to be listening to something only he could hear. Perhaps the forest, perhaps the silence between heartbeats. When at last he faced her, his eyes carried both the storm and its clearing. "You felt Vincent's lie before I saw it," he said. "You marked the tremor in Lydia's silence. You gave me hours where suspicion might have stolen days." His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of command, shaped not for intimidation, but for truth. "For this, you will not stand in shadows. You will stand beside me." Elise's breath caught. "You risk much, giving me that place." "I risk more without it," Rowan replied, stepping closer. "A ruler who listens only to his own echo is already half buried." He studied her face, as if mapping every flicker of thought. "Tell me honestly, Elise, do you fear what you are becoming here?" She held his gaze, the silver of his eyes reflecting her own uncertainty. "I fear what power can carve out of a soul," she admitted. "But I fear silence more. I was traded because I was seen as expendable. If I do not speak now, then their choice will have defined me. I will not let it." A shadow of a smile crossed Rowan's face, fragile as dawn. "Then we are alike." From that day, Elise was present in every council, every gathering where decisions pressed like weights against the room. She sat not as ornament, but as witness, her senses attuned to the undercurrents others dismissed. At times, her gift drained her, the swirl of grief, ambition, suspicion crowding her ribs until she could hardly breathe. Yet in those moments, Rowan's presence anchored her, the steadiness of his voice, the grounding press of his hand against the table, the rare glance that told her she was not alone in bearing the storm. Healing, she found, was not always solitude. Sometimes it was the knowledge that someone else stood steady when the world trembled. Outside the chamber, life in the mansion unfolded in patterns Elise began to cherish. The winter garden became her refuge, the scent of rosemary and violets weaving through her days like balm. She read in the library until her eyes blurred, her fingers tracing the margins where others had left notes. Wolves and humans alike, voices from years before, proof that even power had sought wisdom in quiet. She shared tea with Vera in the mornings, the older woman's words practical but carrying a tenderness that reminded Elise of her mother. Maya and Lena tended her with gentle hands, their laughter stitching warmth into Elise's evenings. Bit by bit, the house that had once felt like a prison began to breathe around her as if it too was softening. Yet, beneath the healing, danger pulsed. Whispers of unrest along the southern border grew louder. Scouts returned with reports of movements cloaked in shadow, and through it all, Elise sensed the strain in Rowan, his posture unyielding, his voice calm, but his solitude deepening like a wound no one else could see. She often found him in the observatory at night, staring at stars as if searching for answers written in constellations. One evening, unable to bear the distance in his silence, she joined him. The dome above glittered with 1,000 points of light, and Rowan stood with hands braced on the railing, his scar catching the starlight. "You carry too much alone," she said gently. He did not turn. "It is what alphas do." "It is what men taught alphas to do," she countered. She stepped closer, her hand brushing the railing until her fingers nearly touched his. "But even wolves hunt in packs. You cannot carry both crown and wound without breaking." For the first time, his shoulders sagged, a fraction, but enough to reveal the exhaustion beneath. He turned to her then, eyes raw, the silver stripped of distance. "And if I break, Elise, what becomes of all who depend on me?" She reached out, laying her hand over his. Warmth met warmth, pulse against pulse. "Then let them depend on both of us." Her voice was steady, but her heart trembled with the truth of it. "I am not here only to listen to lies and truths. I am here to remind you that you are not just alpha. You are man, and men are allowed to lean." Rowan closed his eyes, and for a moment the fortress of him softened. His fingers turned beneath hers, clasping, holding, as though her touch was the first rope thrown into a sea he had been drowning in for years. The silence stretched, not heavy, but healing, filled with the quiet promise that neither was entirely alone anymore. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "If you stay at my side, Elise, the world will call you mine. They will call you Alpha's mate, whether or not it is true." She did not flinch. "Let them call me what they will. I know who I am, and I will decide who I belong to." Her thumb brushed the scar on his knuckle, tender, certain. "1 year, you said? In 1 year, I will choose. Until then, let them whisper. Let them wonder." His breath left him in something between a laugh and a sigh, a sound that carried both relief and longing. He bent his head, and for the briefest moment their foreheads touched, a gesture more intimate than any kiss could have been. It was not possession, it was recognition. That night, Elise returned to her chamber with her heart unsteady but alive, her spirit thrumming with the knowledge that something irrevocable had shifted between them. She was no longer merely prisoner, no longer only advisor. She was becoming a partner, an equal in the making of something vast and fragile. And yet, as dawn broke, the messenger arrived breathless at the gates, bearing word of new unrest. A southern outpost burned, a family gone, a sigil carved in blood. The shadow they had unmasked in Vincent was only the beginning. The council would call, choices would weigh heavier, and the year Rowan had bargained for was already being rewritten by fate. But Elise rose, steadied by her pendant, steadied by her breath, and whispered to herself the vow that had begun to grow roots in her chest. "I will not be defined by what was taken from me. I will be defined by what I choose to build." With that, she stepped into the day, ready to face both danger and desire, knowing that the path ahead would demand every ounce of strength, every fragment of healing, and every beat of the bond forming between her and the Alpha who could no longer pretend he did not need her. The southern fire had not yet dimmed in memory when Elise stepped into the council chamber once more. The air itself felt sharper, cut by grief and anger, by the raw edges of fear that wolves were not accustomed to admitting. Maps were spread across the long table, their inked rivers and borders stained now with urgency. Rowan stood at the head, his hand resting on the parchment, as though the force of his will alone could steady the land. Elise sat near the red tapestry, as always, letting her senses open. Emotions poured into her like currents into a basin: rage, suspicion, weariness, loyalty. Beneath it all pulsed Rowan's restraint, a taut cord pulled so tight it could snap at any wrong word. She breathed into her ribs, soft and steady, allowing her presence to be a balm in a room that throbbed with heat. Nathaniel spoke first, his voice measured, but carrying the gravel of sleepless nights. The southern outpost was burned deliberately. No survivors. The sigil carved into the gate is not one we know. It is a warning. He placed a shard of scorched wood on the table, the symbol etched in blood still visible. The sight dragged a murmur through the chamber, low and uneasy. Elise looked at the mark and felt a strange chill, as though the blood carried an echo of intention, a hunger that was not only for power, but for destruction itself. She closed her eyes, following the thread of it, tasting the bitterness it left behind. "Whoever left this mark," she said softly, "does not want territory. They want fear. They want to fracture you from within before they strike again." All eyes turned to her, some skeptical, some thoughtful. Rowan's gaze, however, was steady as the moon. "Explain," he commanded, though his tone was not harsh. It was an invitation. Elise met the eyes of the council. "Fear makes you turn on each other. It makes you doubt your neighbor, question your leader, mistrust even the truth in front of you. If they can make you suspicious enough, you will tear yourselves apart without them lifting another blade. The fire was not only destruction, it was theater, and you were the audience." The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling. Rowan's jaw tightened, but his eyes gleamed with something like recognition. "Then we will not give them the performance they seek," he said. The council moved on to strategies. Fortifications, alliances, patrols doubled along the southern ridge. Yet through it all, Elise felt the undercurrent, fear gnawing at the edges of even the strongest voices. She placed her hand lightly on the table, letting her energy ripple outward, grounding herself in healing intention. She imagined roots spreading beneath her feet, carrying steadiness into the floor, offering it to the room without demanding they notice. Slowly, the tension eased, conversations settling into focus rather than frenzy. After the council dispersed, Rowan lingered. He beckoned Elise to follow him into the observatory, where dawn spilled pale light through the dome of glass. He stood at the railing, shoulders heavy, scar catching firelight. "They listen to you," he said quietly. "Some with skepticism, but they listen. You calmed them today, when I could not." Elise joined him, her hand brushing the railing near his. "You calm them by command. I calm them by presence. Both are needed." He turned then, his eyes silver bright in the morning. "And who calms you, Elise?" Her breath caught, the question piercing more deeply than she expected. She lowered her gaze to the pendant at her throat, feeling its warmth. "The memory of my mother, the garden, the quiet between words, and sometimes you." Her voice trembled on the last admission, but she did not retract it. Rowan's hand lifted, hesitant, then settled gently over hers, where it rested on the railing. His touch was warm, grounding, like earth after rain. "You heal even while you bleed," he murmured. "It is both your gift and your danger." She turned her hand to entwine her fingers with his, the gesture small but irrevocable. And you lead even while you break. That, too, is gift and danger. For a long while they stood together in silence, the rising sun gilding their faces. No chains, no bargains, no titles, just two souls bound by burdens they could not yet name, leaning into each other like trees grown close enough to share roots. Days turned into weeks. Reports continued to arrive, more symbols, more shadows along the borders, but amidst the turbulence, Elise and Rowan's bond deepened. He invited her into conversations once kept for Nathaniel alone. She walked with him through the training yard, watched him spar with his men, his movements precise and fierce, yet softened when his eyes found hers at the edge of the field. She shared with him the language of flowers from the winter garden, and he listened as if each bloom carried strategy worth knowing. At night, in the observatory, they spoke of stars and stories, of losses neither had confessed to others. Rowan told her of his mother, who built the library with her own hands, who taught him that strength was not cruelty, but clarity. Elise told him of her mother's prayers, whispered into her hair as a child, prayers that still lingered in the rhythm of her breath. These confessions were not promises, but they were seeds, and they began to grow. One evening, as the wolves prepared for patrol, Elise found herself walking alone in the garden. The violets had spread further, their blossoms spilling like quiet courage across the stone. She knelt to touch them, whispering gratitude for their persistence. Healing, she realized, was not only in the grand gestures of survival, but in these small rebellions of beauty against the cold. She did not hear Rowan approach until his shadow crossed hers. "You speak to the flowers," he said, his voice carrying both amusement and tenderness. "They listen," she replied, rising to face him. "And what do they tell you?" "That even in places built for war, something soft can still grow." He studied her then, as if the truth of her words unsettled and steadied him at once. Slowly he reached to tuck a stray lock of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering near her cheek. "You are that softness, Elise, and it frightens me more than any enemy at my borders." She leaned into his touch, her heart steady for once. "Softness is not weakness, Rowan. It is what keeps us human. It is what keeps us whole." Their eyes held, silver and dark, until the world seemed to narrow to the space between them. He bent his head, and for the first time his lips brushed hers. Not with demand, not with possession, but with reverence. The kiss was slow, tentative, as though testing whether something so fragile could survive the weight of them both. It deepened only when she answered, her hand rising to rest against his chest where his heart thundered. When they parted, breath mingling, Elise whispered, "We are building something dangerous." Rowan's smile was faint, but his eyes burned. "Then let it be dangerous. Let it also be true." The garden seemed to sigh around them, the violets swaying in approval. Elise felt warmth spread through her chest, healing old wounds in ways she had never imagined. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that love, unexpected, fierce, imperfect, could be hers. Yet, as the night stretched on, and the wolves returned with news of more unrest, Elise knew the path ahead would not be simple. Their bond would be tested, their choices sharpened by fire. But in that moment, with Rowan's hand still entwined with hers, she also knew this: whatever storms lay ahead, They would face them not as captor and captive, not as alpha and offering, but as two souls daring to heal each other amidst the shadows. The southern wind carried the scent of ash for many days, a constant reminder that peace was not yet within their grasp. Yet in the mansion, life folded itself around moments of warmth, like bandages laid over a wound still aching beneath. Elise walked the corridors no longer as a stranger, but as someone whose footsteps the house seemed to recognize, whose presence left a quiet hush of respect in its wake. The wolves watched her differently now, not as the girl bartered for survival, but as the woman who had stood in the council and seen through the masks of liars. Rowan was never far. He moved through his duties with the same precision as always, but there was a subtle shift in the air when she was near, a tether invisible to the rest of the world. He did not claim her openly, yet the truth hummed in every glance, in the way his voice softened when it turned in her direction. To Elise, it was not possession, but recognition, and that made all the difference. The council continued its battles of words and strategy. Reports from the border grew darker, raids, vanished scouts, symbols left carved in blood. Fear crept in, though cloaked in pride and duty. Elise, ever the quiet anchor, sat at Rowan's side, her senses wide open. She bore the weight of their emotions until her ribs felt like fragile glass, but she carried it still, weaving calm into the storm, reminding herself that healing often came not in grand gestures, but in the steady rhythm of breath and presence. It was during one such council that Rowan's restraint broke for the briefest of moments. A messenger arrived bloodied, bearing the body of a young wolf who had fallen in an ambush. Silence claimed the chamber, heavy and cruel. Rowan's jaw clenched, his hand gripping the table until his knuckles whitened. For the first time, Elise reached for him openly, her hand brushing his beneath the table. His breath caught, but he did not pull away. Instead, his fingers turned, clasping hers with a force that confessed more than words ever could. She felt the storm within him ease, not banished, but soothed, as though her touch had reminded him he was not alone in carrying the unbearable. That night the mansion seemed restless, its stones echoing with grief. Elise found Rowan in the observatory, his scar catching moonlight, his shoulders bowed beneath invisible weight. Without speaking, she stepped beside him, pressing her shoulder to his. He exhaled as though he had been holding his breath for years. "I cannot protect them all," he murmured, voice hoarse. "You are not meant to," Elise whispered. "You are meant to lead, to guide. But even the strongest tree bends in the wind. It does not stand alone. It leans on the forest around it." Rowan turned then, his silver eyes raw. "And you, Elise, do you not see? You have become part of that forest, part of me." Her heart trembled, not with fear, but with something fiercer. She reached up, her hand cupping his cheek, her thumb brushing the scar that had once seemed a mark of cruelty, but now felt like a story of survival. "Then let me carry it with you. Whatever storm comes, let me share it." Their kiss that night was not tentative as before. It was fire and surrender, reverence and hunger bound together. He held her as though she were both anchor and salvation, and she answered with a certainty that surprised even herself. They were not only bound by circumstance now, but by choice. by a love born in shadows, yet strong enough to reach for the light. In the days that followed, whispers filled the mansion. Some called her the Alpha's mate already. Others muttered of danger in giving so much trust to a human girl. Elise met their gazes without flinching. She knew who she was. She knew what she carried. And when Rowan stood beside her, his hand brushing hers in silent affirmation, she knew that together they were building something that fear could not unmake. Still, the world beyond their walls sharpened its claws. The symbols spread, the raids grew bolder, and the council began to murmur of war. Elise felt the weight pressing heavier, but she no longer bore it alone. Rowan's presence steadied her, and her quiet strength steadied him in turn. They had become two threads woven into the same fabric, stronger together, unable to be torn apart without unraveling the whole. One evening, as winter began to loosen its grip, Elise stood in the garden where violets bloomed stubbornly against the cold. Rowan came to her side, his arm brushing hers, his voice quiet. "If war comes, you may leave. I will keep my bargain, 1 year, and then freedom." Elise turned to him, her eyes unwavering. "Freedom is not the absence of ties, Rowan. It is the power to choose them. And I choose this. I choose you." The words struck him like a vow, and for a moment his carefully built walls cracked. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as though letting go would undo the very ground beneath them. And for the first time, Elise felt not prisoner, not pawn, but equal, an Alpha's partner, not by law, but by love freely given. The future was uncertain. Shadows still stirred. War loomed like a storm on the horizon. But as they stood together in the garden, hand in hand, Elise felt something healing settle deep within her chest. Whatever trials awaited, they would not face them alone. And to you, dear listener, if this story has touched something within your own heart, if it has given you even a moment of light amidst your own shadows, I invite you to stay. Leave a comment, share your thoughts, subscribe to join the journey, and let us keep weaving these stories together. Every gesture, every word of support is like a violet blooming in winter. Small, perhaps, but powerful enough to remind us that healing and love can endure even in the darkest of places.